My name is Andy Kristoff, and this is Pathbend, your guide to personal growth and healing, blending science, art, and spirit. Today's topic is the four life positions, a framework that goes to the very roots of our beliefs about ourselves and others and drives the story we live by. In one of my previous videos, I explored the concept of the life script, the unconscious psychological narrative that shapes the grand arc of our lives and governs much of our behavior, especially relationship dynamics. If you haven't watched that video and the video on recognition hunger, I highly recommend starting there to get the most out of today's talk. Now let's dive in. In his seminal book, Transactional Analysis in Psychotherapy, Eric Berne defines a life position as a predicative mental stance, a deep-seated conviction about the value of the self in relation to the value of others. It's not an abstract opinion or a rationally constructed belief system. Rather, it's an early, emotionally embedded position from which all subsequent interactions are interpreted. One of the surprising insights is that this most foundational, life-altering decision is something we make preverbally, between birth and the age of 2, or age 3 at most. This is long before we can understand the world and before we have language, memory, or reflective thought. In other words, by the time our earliest memories start emerging and we start experiencing ourselves as separate individuals, we've already made up our minds about our position in the world. And actually, minds is the wrong word here because this is more of a gut level decision. The infant doesn't reason their way into a position, they feel their way into one. And that feeling becomes fixed and eventually regulatory within our interactions. Once adopted, the life position influences our habitual response to others, usually for the rest of our lives. It's like the governor of our behavior, the selective filter through which every relational transaction is assessed, and the unconscious standard against which the self and others are measured. Before I introduce the four life positions, it's essential to contextualize them within our early developmental arc, what Thomas Harris refers to as the four births. The first birth is cellular. It begins at the moment of conception and lasts until our delivery into the world. This 9-month period of gestation in the womb is the most perfect environment the organism will ever experience. The symbiotic intimacy with the mother is followed by a radical rupture at the moment of physical birth, which is the second key moment. Suddenly, we're born. The outside world isn't just unfamiliar, but completely overwhelming. The baby is flooded with cold, roughness, noise, pressure, brightness, and separateness that seem absolutely terrifying and catastrophic. This feeling of estrangement is recorded in the nervous system. Some call it the birth trauma. And according to Freud, it's at the root of all subsequent anxiety we experience throughout life. If the baby is to survive, in the most literal sense, the estrangement is resolved usually within minutes with the third pivotal moment, our psychological birth. It's initiated by the act of stroking, when a caregiver holds, pats, rocks, and swaddles the newborn. This first contact is indispensable. It shows the baby that the world outside isn't all that bad, and it kickstarts the survival instinct, giving the baby a physiological reason to live. The fourth and final birth happens later, around age 5. It's our social birth, when the child goes to school and integrates into wider social systems beyond the home. Life positions aren't formed during the social phase, though, and this is worth repeating. They're established pre-verbally and pre-consciously. They aren't chosen, they're felt. With this in mind, I can now introduce the four life positions. Each permutation is derived from our decision regarding two foundational questions. Am I okay? And are you okay? This yields the following four configurations. I'm not okay, you're okay. I'm not okay, and you're not okay. I'm okay, but you're not okay. And I'm okay, you're okay. Let's look at each of these in turn, starting with the default life position. I'm not okay, you're okay. Thomas Harris argues convincingly, I believe, that literally everyone starts from this position. Why? Well, because infants enter the world biologically unformed emotionally dependent, and neurologically immature. They look to their caregivers, especially the mother, not only for physical nourishment and safety, but for strokes, the basic units of recognition that affirm the child's existence. In the language of transactional analysis, a stroke is any act of acknowledgement, and for the infant, it's existentially essential. The earliest strokes are strokes in the literal sense. They're tactile, being held, rocked, fed, touched, and later they become more and more abstract, visual, vocal, and eventually verbal cues. Through these early interactions, the infant ascertains that there's another person out there, separate and real, responsive and necessary. This early attunement and radical life or death dependence of the tiny baby on the giant caregiver gives rise to the first psychological conclusion: you are okay. Given the baby's total dependence on the other for survival, this conclusion is inevitable. In contrast to the perceived omnipotence and coherence of the caregiver, the child experiences him or herself as helpless. Stroking depends on others and is intermittent. The pleasure is punctuated by discomfort and pain, even from things like indigestion, wetness, cold, frustration, etc. So the infant concludes, I am not okay because I can't meet my own needs. The I'm not okay, you're okay position is universal in the earliest phase of development. If maternal care is consistent, responsive, and affirming, the child may gradually shift out of this stance. But if the care is conditional, inconsistent, or misattuned, or the position itself remains unexamined in subsequent years, the person may consolidate I'm not okay, you're okay into a lifelong default. The result is a person who feels fundamentally inferior, never quite enough. Even if they become highly competent, high achieving, and even admired, which is by far the most prevalent path from this position, beneath that functionality lies a chronic suspicion that their worth is conditional, their belonging always precarious. This position, which I've dubbed the needy position, isn't tragic in the same sense as the more extreme ones that follow, but it's limiting. And unless we consciously examine and outgrow it, it sets the foundation for a life script centered on proving one's worth and feeling that love is something we need to earn. If Harris is right, this position is true about the vast majority of people in the world. The second position, I'm not okay and you're not okay, is much rarer but far more pernicious. It develops when the child's internal default conclusion, you're okay, starts falling apart in the face of a harsh reality, usually around the age of 1. In cases of severe emotional deprivation, especially in the absence of maternal attunement, the infant receives no reliable confirmation of their existence. The mother isn't necessarily angry or chaotic, but she is emotionally absent and physically unavailable. She may be depressed, overwhelmed, or mentally unwell. To borrow from Andre Green, who coined the term dead mother complex, when mother is absent or emotionally unavailable, the child feels as though she is dead in their eyes. So the child's conclusion becomes existential. I can't trust myself, but I can't trust you either. You're not there. I refer to this as the hopeless position because its emotional undertone is exactly that, hopelessness. The infant is left in a relational vacuum, unable to locate safety either within or without. The emotional and physiological consequence is often a collapse of engagement wherein the child ceases to expect recognition, soothing, or repair. Over time, this position can give rise to a range of adult pathologies. These may include persistent depressive states, schizoid withdrawal, dissociative tendencies, and somatic symptoms with no clear medical origin. While not deterministic, this position increases the likelihood of detachment and chronic affective flatness. The adult ego state, associated with executive functioning, reality testing, and cognitive processing in the here and now, often becomes stunted and inaccessible when the child settles into this hopeless position. The adult goes offline, and the individual gets stuck in childhood. Interestingly, positions are like self-fulfilling prophecies. They're the engine of our life script. In the case of I'm not okay, you're not okay, for example, Instead of responding to present evidence of love or safety, the individual may unconsciously force reality to conform to the early position. Imagine a person who starts dating someone who happens to be kind, caring, and emotionally available. On the surface, everything aligns, it feels great. But deep within, the person's mind whispers, "You're so nice to me, and you say you love me, but I can't trust that because I know I'm not okay, and I know that you're not okay." You feel safe, but something must be wrong. You're probably pretending, you're probably lying, and sooner or later, I just know that your not okayness will surface, and I'll be the one who's left abandoned and shattered. So I'd better break this off right now. This act of self sabotage is a great example of how the early emotional blueprint contaminates and overrides reality. The person may retreat into isolation, or more likely, they'll gravitate to someone who's truly unsafe, someone abusive or emotionally unavailable. And in doing so, they preserve the integrity of the life position. The anxiety is lessened, the cognitive dissonance disappears, but the cost is dire. Happiness and genuine connection remain perpetually out of reach. If you've stayed with me this far, I hope you're finding this content valuable. So please hit the like button below and subscribe to my channel. It takes only a second and supports my mission to help others live more fulfilling lives. I appreciate your support. Now, the third position is potentially even worse, even more tragic. It's "I'm okay, you're not okay." This is what Harris calls the criminal position, not necessarily in the legal sense, but definitely in the relational one. It emerges when the child's boundaries are repeatedly violated by a conspicuously not okay caregiver. Overwhelmed by intrusion and even brutality, they can no longer tolerate the pain of not feeling okay. Typically, this follows episodes of severe physical abuse or emotional cruelty coming from a primary caregiver. The battering is often unpredictable, intermittent episodes of rage or control, followed by periods of relative calm. And during these brief respites, the child experiences a fragile, distorted sense of safety. Not because the caregiver has become suddenly trustworthy, but because they are, for the moment, absent. The resulting internal logic is, "I'm okay as long as you're far away from me. I'm safe as long as you have no power." Over time, the child's perception of the other as not okay becomes fused with their survival strategy. To maintain a sense of coherence, they flip the original position and adopt a stance of "I'm okay, but you're not okay," an inversion driven by necessity. It's a coping strategy well adapted to what we may think of as a wartime environment, a way of preserving the organism from complete psychic disintegration. This position often gives rise to a number of developmental adaptations, some of which are pathological. In extreme cases, this may serve as the psychic soil from which antisocial personality disorder, psychopathy, develops, particularly when there's a total absence of empathy and a persistent violation of boundaries. More commonly, it underlies narcissistic adaptations. A child growing up in this environment often covers up the unbearable pain of the not okay feeling by sacrificing their emergent vulnerable self for a false self. This is an omnipotent okay self, polished, performative, and hollow. It functions as a shield against the sense of shame and radical powerlessness during those formative abusive episodes. Professor Sam Vaknin, one of the foremost authorities on narcissism, compares the emergence of this narcissistic defense system to a private religion. The false self becomes the child's private god, on whose altar the true self is sacrificed in exchange for emotional survival and protection. As grown-ups, such individuals continue reasserting and acting out of that position. They become extractive and manipulative, preoccupied with maintaining control, and perpetually vigilant against vulnerability. Their grandiosity is not genuine self-worth, but rather a fragile, compensatory emotional architecture designed to avoid the re-experiencing of the absolutely horrific not okayness of their early childhood. If you followed closely, you may recognize how this position is the flintstone for abusive relationships. Assuming most people come from the first "I'm not okay, you're okay" position, This polar opposite finds natural resonance. The two are mutually reinforcing, the latter dominating through exploitation and control, the former typically becoming the emotional and often literal victim. Now let's switch gears and look at the bright side of the coin. The last position, I'm okay and you're okay, is the only one associated with psychological thriving. But it's also the only one that doesn't emerge organically. Unlike the other three, which are emotionally inferred and fundamentally affect based, the fourth position is conscious, verbal, and rational. It's an adult driven, reality based decision, not a reflex. Importantly, adopting this stance doesn't erase the early neurological recordings of the not okay feeling. Those emotional recordings etched into the nervous system during infancy don't disappear. Rather, the rational I'm okay, you're okay position serves as an alternative, superimposed framework through which these early feelings can be contextualized and contained. Choosing this position doesn't mean always feeling positive. Instead, it means recognizing negative affects as echoes from the past instead of accurate reflections of present reality. The individual learns to use their adult ego state, the part of the psyche responsible for reality testing and logical processing, to evaluate their current experiences against objective evidence. They consciously choose to override past emotional conditioning with present data. As part of this process, they can even leverage the collective wisdom of human experience beyond the here and now. By connecting one's personal experiences to universal human struggles and insights, say through an exploration of literature, philosophical traditions, or ethical frameworks, the individual anchors their sense of okayness not just in immediate reality, which may or may not be optimal, but in the broader human condition. This position also allows for secure relationships, intimacy without enmeshment, autonomy without avoidance, and disagreement without devaluation. It's a position of mutual dignity that can move us beyond psychological games towards true intimacy. It's rare, but it's accessible to most of us. In an important way, this very question, how do we shift from I'm not okay to I'm okay, or to put it more simply, how do we heal and grow, is the reason I started this channel. Life positions give us a conceptual foundation for understanding the bedrock of interpersonal dynamics. They explain not just what we do, but why we default to certain patterns of approach or avoidance, dominance or submission, blame or collapse. Most importantly, they help us trace these defaults back to their developmental origin. And as I've emphasized, that origin isn't rational, it's relational. The infant who lacks soothing touch doesn't conclude, I'm dysregulated. They conclude, I'm not okay. And if the mother is dead in the psychological sense, the next step is, you're not okay either. This is how existential despair begins. However, and this is the pivotal point, life positions aren't immutable. They're adopted unconsciously, but we can revise them consciously. The position of I'm okay, you're okay, isn't just an affirmation, it's a developmental achievement. It requires reflection, courage, and often the reparative presence of others who can model safety and mutual respect. My channel exists to support that movement, to offer frameworks, language, and insight for the shift out of the unconscious positions we inherited into the conscious stance of self-esteem and authentic connection. Because the position you hold isn't just about the past, it shapes what kind of future you believe is possible. Before I close, it's worth qualifying what I just said. While the four positions offer a powerful interpretive framework, treat them as a heuristic rather than a comprehensive model. Contemporary research in neuroscience, developmental trauma, and attachment theory has added significant nuance, particularly in understanding how these early psychological stances are shaped by autonomic nervous system regulation and implicit memory. Sometimes what appears to be a position may in fact be a self-state, one conditioned by the body's experience of threat or safety. For this reason, the four positions are best treated as emotional imprints rather than as fixed identities. Their value lies in illuminating hidden psychological structures, not in defining individuals in absolute terms, and certainly not in serving as labels for judging oneself and others. In future videos, I'll be exploring related ideas and offering practical steps for moving toward the okay position. Ultimately, this shift from merely surviving and coping to thriving and self actualization is the essence of the process of unfolding. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, so feel free to expand on these insights or share your own experiences of navigating the journey to wellness. And if you found this video helpful, please consider sharing it with others who might benefit from its message. It's such referrals that help this channel grow. Until next time, thank you for being here.